Look closely at Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, that timeless sketch where the human form stretches within a perfect circle and square. At first glance, it's a masterpiece of art, but dig deeper and you'll find something astonishing: a blueprint. This wasn't just a study of proportions. It was a bold declaration that the secrets of the universe could be unlocked through symbols, through the marriage of geometry and biology. And Da Vinci wasn't alone. Centuries before him, thinkers across the ancient world were doing the same thing, using symbols not as mere decorations, but as tools to decode the mysteries of nature. Take the ouroboros, that serpent forever devouring its own tail. To the untrained eye, it's a cryptic emblem, maybe even a little eerie. But to alchemists and philosophers, it was a revolutionary idea, a visual representation of eternal cycles, of renewal, of the very laws that govern chemistry and life itself. Or consider the tree of life, its branches reaching skyward while its roots dig deep into the earth. This wasn't just spiritual imagery, it was an early model of interconnected systems, a precursor to how we now understand ecology and the web of life. These symbols weren't static, they were alive with meaning, shaping how early scientists observed, questioned, and ultimately reshaped the world. So how did these ancient emblems, these cryptic diagrams, become the scaffolding for scientific thought? How did the language of mystics and scribes evolve into the language of astronomers, anatomists, and inventors? That's the journey we're about to take from the alchemical labs of ancient Egypt to the star-charted notebooks of Renaissance astronomers. Along the way, you'll see how the past's most enduring symbols didn't just inspire art or religion. They laid the groundwork for discovery itself. Because science, at its heart, has always been about reading the hidden patterns of the world, and sometimes those patterns were hiding in plain sight, etched into symbols that dared the curious to look closer. Long before telescopes or star charts, the night sky was humanity's first laboratory, and its symbols were the first equations. Take the ancient Egyptians, who didn't just worship the sun god Ra as a deity. They mapped his journey across the heavens with precision, using the sun disk symbol to mark solstices and equinoxes. This wasn't mere mythology. It was proto-astronomy, a way to measure time, predict floods, and sow crops with scientific accuracy. Similarly, the Babylonians didn't see the Zodiac as just celestial art. They read it like a clock, tracking Jupiter's movements to create some of history's earliest planetary forecasts. These symbols weren't decorations, they were tools, turning the chaos of the cosmos into something calculable. Think of the Rosetta Stone, that slab of granite that cracked open the mystery of hieroglyphs. In a way, ancient stargazers were doing the same thing, using symbols to translate nature's cryptic language into something humans could understand. Pythagoras took it further when he claimed the planets themselves hummed in harmony, their orbits vibrating like the strings of a lyre. To modern ears, that might sound poetic, but to him, it was a hypothesis, one that later inspired Kepler's laws of planetary motion. The line between myth and measurement was blurrier than we think. And then there's the Fibonacci sequence, hidden for centuries in the spiral of a nautilus shell or the petals of a flower. Medieval scholars called it the divine proportion, a sacred echo of nature's hidden order. But what started as mystical reverence soon became mathematical gold, a blueprint for everything from galaxy formations to stock market trends. The irony. These patterns were always there, whispering in the language of symbols, waiting for someone to listen. Alchemy's laboratories were more than just smoky dens of mystic rituals. They were the birthplaces of chemistry itself. At the heart of it all lay the philosopher's stone, that elusive symbol of transformation. To medieval alchemists, it wasn't just about turning lead into gold. It was a quest to unlock nature's deepest secrets. Every failed experiment, every melted crucible, was a step toward understanding how matter itself could change. Take Paracelsus, the maverick physician who saw the human body as a mirror of the cosmos. He didn't just mix potions, he mapped diseases to planetary alignments, using astrological symbols to guide his treatments. While his methods seem strange today, his insistence that the body obeyed universal laws paved the way for modern medicine. Then there's the caduceus, those twin serpents coiled around a staff. Long before it became the symbol of hospitals, it represented something far more profound: balance. The ancient Greeks saw it as a dance of opposites: health and sickness, poison and cure. Alchemists adopted it, recognizing that every reaction, every transformation required equilibrium. It's no accident that this same idea resurfaces in chemistry's equations, where every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Symbols like these weren't just pretty drawings, they were hypotheses in visual form, pushing thinkers to test the boundaries of what was possible. But here's the twist. Did these metaphors hold science back, or did they fuel it? Some argue that alchemy's mystical language obscured real discovery, but others see it differently. Without the philosopher's stone as a goal, would anyone have bothered to distill liquids or weigh metals? Without the caduceus, would the idea of chemical balance have taken root so deeply? Symbols gave these early experimenters a framework, a language to describe what they couldn't yet measure. And when the time came, that language evolved into something even more powerful: the precise formulas of modern science. This blending of symbol and substance didn't stop at the alchemist's bench. Just as the caduceus hinted at balance, religious art held clues to the body's inner workings. Medieval anatomists pored over intricate illustrations of Adam and Eve, where every muscle and vein was depicted with almost scientific precision. These weren't just devotional images, they were early textbooks, teaching generations that the human form, like the universe, was a puzzle waiting to be solved. The line between sacred icon and scientific diagram was thinner than you might think. The Babylonians gazed at the stars and saw more than scattered lights. They saw a story written in constellations, a celestial bestiary of lions, bulls, and scorpions. When Ptolemy, centuries later, mapped the heavens in his Almagest, he wasn't just drawing dots and lines, he was inheriting a symbolic language. Those animal figures weren't arbitrary. They were anchors, helping early astronomers track planets against a backdrop of myth. Imagine trying to predict Jupiter's path without a reference point. It would be like navigating a featureless ocean. The Zodiac gave them a grid, turning the sky into a calculable space long before telescopes or star charts. But here's where symbolism collided with science. Pythagoras had spoken of the music of the spheres, the idea that planets moved in harmonic ratios, their orbits singing a perfect, inaudible melody. For centuries, this poetic vision held sway until Kepler's math tore it apart. His laws didn't just describe planetary motion, they stripped away the mysticism, replacing celestial choirs with ellipses and equations. Yet even Kepler couldn't escape symbolism entirely. His work on planetary harmonies still echoed Pythagoras, proving that ancient metaphors could guide even the most rigorous minds. Then came Galileo, pointing his telescope at the moon and seeing something shocking: craters, mountains, a surface as rough and flawed as Earth's. That single observation shattered the old ideal of heavenly perfection, the belief that the cosmos was an immutable, symbolic ideal. Suddenly, the sky was no longer a divine tapestry but a place of chaos and geology. Yet even as old symbols fell, new ones rose. Alchemists had drawn the sun as a circle with a dot at its center, a simple glyph that later became astronomy's symbol for our star. The tools changed, but the human urge to encode nature's secrets into visual shorthand never faded. So what about the forces closer to home? Wind, rain, the unpredictable fury of storms. Medieval scholars saw weather as a battleground of symbols, where thunder was the wrath of gods and rainbows were divine covenants. But strip away the mythology, and you'll find the seeds of meteorology. The same minds that charted the zodiac's animals also recorded cloud patterns, wind directions, and seasonal shifts. Their symbols were crude by today's standards, but they were the first steps toward predicting the unpredictable. The line between sacred sign and scientific tool has always been thinner than we think. Numbers weren't just tools for counting to the Pythagoreans, they were sacred keys to the universe's design. Picture this, a group of ancient thinkers huddled in secrecy, convinced that the number 1 represented divine unity, the source of all things, while 2 embodied the tension of opposites, light and dark, male and female, chaos and order. To them, mathematics wasn't just calculation, it was a form of worship, a way to commune with the cosmos. Even Plato caught the fever, writing in his Timaeus that fire was a tetrahedron, earth a cube, air an octahedron, and water an icosahedron. These weren't just poetic metaphors, they were early attempts to explain physics through geometry, to reduce the messy complexity of nature into elegant, symmetrical forms. Yet for all their mysticism, the Pythagoreans stumbled onto truths that still resonate. When they discovered musical harmonies could be expressed as simple ratios, a string half as long plays an octave higher, they weren't just hearing notes, they were uncovering the mathematical skeleton of reality itself. Fast forward to Archimedes, who took these abstract ideas and bent them to human will. His levers and pulleys, his eureka moment in the bath, these weren't just feats of engineering. They were proof that the same numbers worshipped as divine could also build ships, move mountains, and measure the heavens. The irony, while Pythagoras saw numbers as gods, Archimedes treated them as tools, yet both approaches pushed science forward in ways neither could have predicted. So did numerology hold back real progress, or did it lay the groundwork for it? Some argue that fixating on numbers as mystical symbols delayed rigorous experimentation, trapping thinkers in a web of superstition. But others point out that without Pythagoras' obsession with harmony, would Kepler have been so driven to find music in the orbits of planets? Without Plato's geometric elements, would chemists have later sought to categorize matter into neat, symmetrical arrangements? Symbolism gave early scholars a framework flawed, perhaps, but fertile, to ask questions that pure pragmatism might never have sparked. This dance between symbol and science didn't stop at the stars or the workshop. Walk through a medieval herb garden, and you'd hear whispers of the doctrine of signatures, the belief that plants revealed their purpose through shape and color. Lungwort, with its speckled leaves resembling diseased lungs, was prescribed for bronchitis. Heart-shaped violets treated cardiac ailments. To modern eyes, it sounds like superstition, but look closer. This was early botany, a system of classification based on observation, however imperfect. When a healer picked a yellow flower for jaundice, they were making a hypothesis, testing nature's patterns against human need. Over time, these hunches evolved into pharmacology as chemists isolated the active compounds in those very plants. The symbols didn't vanish, they transformed from mystical signs into molecular diagrams. What's striking isn't just how often these symbolic systems got things wrong, but how often they pointed, however clumsily, toward truths we now take for granted. The Pythagoreans' number mysticism birthed algebra. The doctrine of signatures, for all its quirks, helped map the link between plant chemistry and medicine. Even Plato's geometric elements, though wildly off the mark, echoed the modern quest for a unified theory of matter. The past symbols weren't dead ends, they were bridges, fragile but vital, between wonder and understanding. The emerald tablet's enigmatic phrase, "as above, so below," wasn't just a mystical slogan to Renaissance scholars, it was a working hypothesis. This single line, attributed to the legendary Hermes Trismegistus, became the foundation for an entire worldview, one where the smallest leaf and the grandest star were bound by invisible threads of symmetry. Take Isaac Newton, a name synonymous with gravity and calculus, yet few know he spent more time deciphering alchemical manuscripts than composing his Principia. To him, the universe wasn't just a machine, it was a coded message, a puzzle where planetary orbits mirrored atomic vibrations, where the fall of an apple echoed the pull of distant galaxies. His notebooks reveal a mind obsessed with finding unity, convinced that the same forces governing comets also stirred the blood in human veins. But here's the paradox: while symbols like the emerald tablet spurred geniuses to seek universal laws, they also shackled progress. Alchemists wasted centuries searching for quintessence, a fifth element they believed permeated the heavens, simply because Aristotle's cosmology had declared it so. The microcosm-macrocosm analogy, for all its poetic beauty, sometimes led thinkers down blind alleys, mistaking metaphor for mechanism, yet even these missteps had value. Without the hermetic conviction that nature repeated its patterns, would anyone have thought to compare the branching of rivers to the veins in a leaf, or the structure of a cell to the orbits of planets? Symbolism, for all its flaws, trained minds to look for connections where others saw chaos. Nowhere is this tension more vivid than in the anatomical theaters of the Renaissance. Andreas Vesalius, the father of modern anatomy, peeled back the skin of cadavers with unprecedented precision, yet his groundbreaking illustrations still posed skeletons like classical orators, one hand resting pensively on a skull. Why? Because even as science shed old superstitions, the urge to infuse the body with symbolic meaning persisted. The skeleton wasn't just bones, it was a memento mori, a reminder of life's fragility. The heart wasn't just a pump, it was the seat of the soul, a belief lingering from ancient Egyptian embalmers who discarded the brain but preserved the heart for the afterlife. What's fascinating isn't that science eventually discarded these symbols, it's how long they endured, shaping questions even as methods grew rigorous. Vesalius' mix of artistry and accuracy paved the way for modern medicine, yet his work also whispers of a time when every dissection was a philosophical act, a search for divine fingerprints in flesh and sinew. The Hermetic vision of a mirrored universe may have faded, but its legacy lingers in the way we still seek unifying theories, still crave patterns that make the vast and the infinitesimal feel like parts of a single, intelligible whole. Tycho Brahe's observatory wasn't just a temple to the stars, it was a factory for data, churning out celestial measurements so precise they'd shape astronomy for centuries. But here's the twist: those same logs that mapped planetary orbits also fed the hunger of kings for horoscopes. Brahe knew his patrons craved astrological predictions, so he delivered, casting nativities for European nobility between calculating the positions of Mars. It's easy to dismiss this as mere pandering, but look closer. Without the financial lure of astrology, would Brahe have secured the funding to build Uraniborg, his island fortress of telescopes and quadrants? The very instruments that later proved Earth wasn't the universe's center were bankrolled by belief in zodiacal fate. Galileo played the same game. When he needed Medici patronage to grind his revolutionary lenses, he didn't just offer moons around Jupiter. he flattered their dynastic pride with astrological forecasts tailored to their birth charts. The man who shattered Aristotle's crystalline spheres still penned horoscopes for wealthy clients, a contradiction that feels jarring today, yet this duality was the norm. The sky was both a clockwork and a storybook, its motions passed for both mathematical laws and human destiny. Then there's Kepler, who famously called astrology the foolish daughter of astronomy, but couldn't quite shake its grip. His groundbreaking laws of planetary motion first appeared in drafts peppered with references to planetary, souls, and harmonic essences. Even as his math stripped the heavens of medieval mysticism, part of him still heard Pythagorean music in the equations. This tension raises a provocative question. Did the symbolic framework of astrology, the idea that celestial patterns mirror earthly events, actually prime these thinkers to seek physical laws in the first place? The same blurring of myth and method echoes in medieval bestiaries, those lavishly illustrated volumes where griffins and unicorns lounged beside real lions and whales. To modern eyes, they're fantastical curiosities, but their creators were earnest classifiers, organizing creatures by traits and habitats. A mermaid might share a page with a seal, not because anyone believed they were identical, but because both bridged land and sea. These books, for all their whimsy, established early systems of taxonomy grouping animals by function, diet, and environment. When later naturalists like Linnaeus formalized biological classification, they inherited a habit of mind forged by bestiary makers who saw the natural world as a puzzle to be decoded, one symbolic creature at a time. So where do we draw the line between superstition and science? Perhaps there isn't one. Just as alchemy's quest for transmutation birthed chemistry, astrology's star charts paved the way for orbital mechanics, and bestiary's fantastical menageries hinted at ecology's interconnected web. The past symbols weren't obstacles to progress, they were the scaffolding, crude but essential, that let thinkers reach for truths they couldn't yet fully grasp. The irony is profound. What we now dismiss as pseudoscience often held the seeds of discovery, wrapped in stories that made the universe feel knowable. And isn't that, after all, what science strives to do? Imagine walking into a medieval apothecary where jars lined the shelves with labels promising remedies for everything from fever to heartache. Among them, one item stood out: a spiraled ivory tusk sold as a unicorn horn, believed to neutralize poisons and cure ailments. What customers didn't know was that these so-called magical relics were actually narwhal tusks, harvested from Arctic seas and passed off as mythical artifacts. This wasn't just deception, it was a collision of symbolism and early science. The unicorn, a creature of purity in medieval lore, became a medical brand, its horn a placebo wrapped in legend. Yet within this superstition lay a kernel of truth, the placebo effect itself, proof that belief could shape healing long before modern pharmacology understood why. Pliny the Elder's natural history took this blending further, weaving together accurate observations of elephants and dolphins with tales of men with dog heads and trees that grew wool. To modern readers, it's a frustrating mix of fact and fantasy, but to Renaissance scholars, it was a foundational text. Why? Because Pliny's impulse to catalogue, to name, describe, and group was proto-science in action. His errors were glaring, but his method was revolutionary. The world could be organized, studied, compared. Centuries later, Linnaeus would formalize taxonomy, but he stood on the shoulders of these early encyclopedists who dared to sort nature into categories, however flawed. Then there's the griffin, that majestic hybrid of eagle and lion. To medieval minds, it wasn't just a mythical beast, it was a puzzle. If creatures could blend traits across species, what did that mean for the boundaries of life itself? This question haunted naturalists long before Darwin, when explorers brought back tales of platypus's egg-laying mammals with duck-like bills. Scientists initially dismissed them as hoaxes, so entrenched was the idea that nature's categories should be rigid. The griffin, absurd as it was, had primed thinkers to grapple with the reality that nature's rules were more fluid than symbols suggested. But symbolism's influence didn't stop at bestiaries or pharmacies. Step inside a Gothic cathedral, and you'll find another kind of coded knowledge, the golden ratio etched into stained glass, the Fibonacci sequence spiraling in rose windows. Architects didn't just build these structures to awe the faithful. They encoded mathematical harmonies into every arch and column, believing divine order could be expressed through geometry. Centuries later, physicists like Kepler would chase those same ratios in planetary orbits, convinced the universe's blueprint was written in number and form. What began as sacred geometry became scientific law, proving that even the grandest symbols could evolve into tools for discovery. The irony is delicious. Unicorn horns fueled medicine's infancy, griffins stretched the limits of taxonomy, and cathedral builders unknowingly drafted the language of physics. These symbols weren't just fanciful distractions, they were stepping stones, imperfect but indispensable, guiding humanity from superstition to system, from myth to microscope. Gothic cathedrals rise like frozen hymns, their vaulted ceilings stretching toward heaven, but look closer, and you'll find more than piety carved into those stones. Hidden in the curves of every arch, the proportions of every nave, lies a secret language of numbers. The builders called it divine harmony, but we'd recognize it today as the golden ratio, that mathematical constant where the whole relates to its parts in perfect balance. At Chartres Cathedral, the labyrinth embedded in the floor isn't just a path for pilgrims. It's a geometric cipher, its 11 concentric circles mirroring the orbits medieval scholars believed planets followed. This wasn't accidental artistry. By encoding cosmic ideals into mortar and glass, these craftsmen unknowingly stumbled onto principles of physics. The same ratio that gave their rose windows ethereal beauty also distributed weight so precisely that thin stone ribs could support towering walls without collapsing. Leonardo da Vinci would later sketch those same arches in his notebooks, dissecting their curves to understand how load-bearing shapes channeled forces downward. His Vitruvian Man wasn't the only fusion of art and engineering. The cathedrals had already proven that aesthetics could drive structural innovation. When masons carved leaf-shaped bosses into vault intersections, they weren't just decorating, they were reinforcing stress points with nature's own designs. The irony, these builders thought they were echoing God's blueprint, but they were really pioneering materials science. Every flying buttress, every clustered column, was a hypothesis tested in stone, proving that symbolism could birth solutions long before equations explained them. Now cross continents to the workshops of medieval Islamic scholars, where another marriage of symbol and science took shape, the Astrolabe. More than just a navigational tool, it was a portable cosmos, its brass discs etched with constellations and azimuth curves. Turn the retere, and suddenly the night sky spun at your fingertips, its star patterns aligned to calculate prayer times, plot latitudes, even predict tides. Unlike the cathedral's static geometry, the Astrolabe was dynamic, blending myth and math into a single instrument. The same stars navigators used to guide ships across deserts of water were the ones poets described as celestial camels or scorpions. Did these symbolic layers make the Astrolabe less scientific? Quite the opposite. By embedding familiar constellations into its design, makers ensured users could decode complex calculations through visual anchors. The North Star wasn't just a reference point, it was a character in humanity's oldest stories, now repurposed as a guidepost for explorers. Like the golden ratio in Gothic arches, these celestial symbols didn't obscure function, they made it accessible, wrapping precision in poetry. The astrolabe's genius lay in its duality, a tool that measured time and space while still whispering of the cosmos's mystery. So where does that leave us? With the unsettling realization that the line between inspiration and innovation has always been blurred, the same symbols that adorned stained glass or astrolabes weren't just decorative, they were conceptual scaffolding, helping thinkers bridge the known and the unknown. When a mason laid stones in harmonic ratios or an astronomer mapped stars onto brass, they weren't choosing between beauty and utility. They were proving, centuries before modern labs, that curiosity wears many guises, and sometimes the path to discovery begins with a story etched in stone or metal. The astrolabe rested in a navigator's palm like a miniature universe, its brass face etched with zodiac signs and star paths. To the untrained eye, these symbols might seem like decorative flourishes, but to a sailor under the vast Arabian night, they were a lifeline. By aligning the retere, a delicate, star-pierced disk with the horizon, mariners could pinpoint their latitude using Polaris or the Southern Cross. The very constellations mythmakers had woven into legends became coordinates on a celestial grid. Yet this wasn't just practical engineering, it was alchemy of a different kind, transforming mythology into mathematics. Take Al-Biruni, the 11th century polymath who didn't just use the astrolabe, he pushed it to its limits. While others relied on its star maps for navigation, he saw deeper potential. By measuring the angle of the sun from two different locations, he sketched quadrant diagrams adorned with symbolic divisions, then used them to calculate Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy. His result, a figure within 1% of the modern value. The irony is rich. A device decorated with zodiacal imagery became the key to dismantling the idea that Earth was the static center of creation. But the astrolabe story takes a sharper turn when it reaches the hands of Columbus. The same instrument that once guided Muslim pilgrims to Mecca now steered Spanish caravels toward the unknown. Columbus' crew might have muttered prayers over its brass face, invoking Saint Christopher alongside the stars, but the astrolabe didn't discriminate between sacred and secular. It simply worked, its symbolic engravings now serving empires its original makers never envisioned. This duality raises a provocative question: can a tool outgrow its symbolic roots? The astrolabe suggests yes, but not cleanly. Even as it fueled exploration, it never quite shed its ceremonial past. Persian astronomers still used it to determine prayer times. European nobles displayed jeweled versions as emblems of wisdom. Its power lay precisely in this fluidity, bridging the mystical and the measurable. Half a world away, another ancient technology was undergoing a similar transformation. Chinese oracle bones, cracked by fire to reveal the will of ancestors, bore inscriptions that seem worlds apart from the astrolabe's precision. Yet look closer. Those branching fractures weren't just random, they followed patterns that scribes meticulously recorded. Over centuries, these cracks evolved into the earliest systematic accounts of eclipses, comets, and weather events. What began as divination became data, the first flickers of empirical observation emerging from ritual. Like the astrolabe star maps, the bone's symbols didn't vanish, they adapted, becoming vessels for a new kind of knowledge. The lesson here isn't just about tools, it's about how humanity thinks. We wrap discovery in stories, clothe calculations in myth, because symbols are the handles by which we grasp the unfamiliar. The astrolabe didn't abandon its zodiac to become scientific. It used that zodiac as a stepping stone. And in those cracks on turtle shells, we see the same impulse to find order, first in gods, then in patterns, and finally in laws. The journey from omen to algorithm was never a straight line. It was a spiral, winding through wonder on its way to proof. 3,000 years ago, Shang dynasty priests pressed red hot rods into turtle shells, watching as the heat spiderwebbed cracks across the bone. To them, these fractures weren't random. They were messages from ancestors, a celestial Morse code etched in divination. Yet hidden in those ritual cracks lay something extraordinary, the earliest known system of recorded questions and answers, a proto-database of weather patterns, harvest yields, and even military campaigns. Fast forward to the 17th century, when German polymath Gottfried Leibniz pored over a Latin translation of the I Ching, the ancient Chinese text built on 64 hexagrams, stacks of broken and unbroken lines representing yin and yang. To Leibniz, these weren't just symbols of balance, they were a revelation. The binary code he'd been sketching, where all numbers could be represented by ones and zeros, suddenly mirrored the I Ching's duality. The same language once used to consult spirits now underpinned the logic of computation. Jesuit missionaries acted as unwitting conduits for this intellectual fusion. Matteo Ricci, who marveled at China's celestial observatories, sent back scrolls detailing the I Ching's intricate symbolism. European scholars, already steeped in alchemical dualities like sun and moon or sulfur and mercury, seized on these Eastern parallels. Leibniz himself wrote that the hexagrams confirmed his belief in a universal characteristic, a symbolic language that could reduce all human thought to mathematical clarity. It's no accident that centuries later, binary code, the foundation of every digital device, bears the ghostly imprint of those turtle shell cracks. The ones and zeros flashing through your phone right now are distant cousins to the unbroken and broken lines Shang priests once traced with reverent fingers. But here's the provocative twist. Does modern programming's obsession with languages Python, Java, C++ echo something older? When a coder writes if-then statements, they're not so different from a diviner parsing cracks for yes-no answers. Both rely on symbolic shorthand to navigate complexity. The irony is delicious. Our most cutting-edge technology runs on logic that would feel eerily familiar to an ancient priest holding a scorched shell. This dance between symbol and system didn't stop at mathematics. In Renaissance Florence, artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Andreas Vesalius flayed open cadavers under candlelight, not just to map muscles and veins, but to hunt for the soul's physical seat. Medieval theology had placed it in the heart, but Vesalius' scalpel revealed a brain humming with intricate folds, a labyrinth as cryptic as any oracle bone. His illustrations, though scientifically precise, still posed skeletons pointing heavenward, a nod to the enduring belief that anatomy held spiritual clues. Even as science peeled back layers of flesh, the human body remained a living symbol, its parts freighted with meaning. The heart wasn't just a pump, it was courage. The brain wasn't just tissue, it was the mind's throne. What unites these threads, divination, binary, dissection, is the relentless human urge to translate the ineffable into systems. Whether cracking bones or writing code, we're forever building bridges between the tangible and the unseen. The Shang priests would have understood Leibniz's zeros as absences waiting to be filled, just as Vesalius saw in sinews not just function, but a map of divine craftsmanship. Symbols, it turns out, aren't the opposite of science. They're its silent partners, whispering frameworks until hard evidence catches up. Da Vinci's sketches of the human heart don't just show an organ, they reveal a mind caught between two worlds. With meticulous precision, he mapped every twist of the ventricles, every branching artery, yet superimposed over these anatomical truths were geometric shapes, circles, spirals, even the golden ratio. To him, the heart wasn't just a pump, it was a riddle wrapped in sacred geometry, its chambers echoing the cosmic order. One page might show a flawlessly rendered aortic valve, while beside it, a note speculates whether the soul resides in the heart's central cavity, where his compass had traced a perfect curve. This duality defines Da Vinci's genius. His scalpel peeled back layers of flesh, but his pen kept searching for symbols hidden beneath. Nowhere is this tension clearer than in his Vitruvian Man. That iconic figure, limbs outstretched within circle and square, wasn't just an artistic exercise, it was a hypothesis. If the universe obeyed geometric laws, shouldn't the human body, its pinnacle of creation, do the same? His measurements of finger lengths, shoulder spans, and pelvic arches weren't arbitrary. They were tests of an ancient idea that ideal forms underpinned reality. Yet for all his reverence for symmetry, Da Vinci's dissections often contradicted it. When he drew the crisscrossing veins of the liver or the asymmetrical lobes of the brain, he didn't force them into perfect shapes. He let the imperfections stand, proving that even a symbol-obsessed mind could bow to evidence. This raises a provocative question. Did his symbolic lens distort or sharpen his vision? Take his famous heart studies. By overlaying spirals on the organ structure, he noticed something revolutionary. The blood's swirling flow resembled water eddies he'd sketched in his hydraulic experiments. The symbol didn't blind him. It guided his eye toward a hydrodynamic principle modern cardiology would later confirm. Yet in other cases, symbolism led him astray. His quest to find the soul's physical seat, a notion inherited from Aristotle, wasted pages of speculation, despite his own dissections proving the brain's role in sensation and motion. Centuries later, Newton faced a similar dance between symbol and science. His prism experiments, which shattered sunlight into a rainbow, are celebrated as a triumph of optics. But few realize how deeply alchemy colored his thinking literally. To Newton, the spectrum wasn't just wavelengths, it was a hierarchy, with red symbolizing base matter and violet representing spiritual refinement. His notes reveal frantic attempts to align the 7 colors with the 7 planets of antiquity, convinced the universe spoke in chromatic harmony. Yet from this symbolic soup emerged his groundbreaking theory of light. That white light contained all hues, a truth we now take for granted. Like Da Vinci, Newton's symbols weren't cages, they were springboards, pushing him to ask questions pure empiricism might never have posed. The lesson here isn't that symbolism hindered or helped, but that it framed the questions. Da Vinci's geometric heart led him to ponder fluid dynamics. Newton's alchemical rainbow birthed optics. Their symbols weren't endpoints, they were starting points, lenses through which chaos could be interrogated. When we dismiss ancient emblems as mere superstition, we forget how often they've been the first rough drafts of discovery. Newton's fascination with color wasn't just about rainbows, it was a hunt for hidden harmonies. In his private notebooks, he scribbled feverishly about the philosopher's stone, convinced its legendary power to transmute metals lay encoded in the spectrum's hues. To him, the 7 colors weren't arbitrary, they mirrored the 7 notes of the musical scale, the 7 known planets, even the 7 days of creation. He arranged them in a circle like an alchemist's wheel, where red bled into violet like base lead transforming into gold. This wasn't mere poetry, it was a working theory, an attempt to unify light, sound, and cosmos under one symbolic framework. Yet for all its mysticism, this chromatic obsession led him to a startling discovery. When he darkened his room, pierced a single beam of sunlight through a prism, and watched it fracture into bands on the wall, he wasn't just seeing colors. He was witnessing proof that white light contained multitudes. The same mind that linked indigo to Saturn's melancholy also deduced that lenses would always blur images because different colors refract at different angles, a problem he'd later solve by inventing the reflecting telescope. So did his alchemical symbolism slow him down or speed him up? On one hand, years were wasted trying to force the spectrum into sevens, ignoring the continuum his own experiments revealed. On the other, that same symbolic drive pushed him to ask questions no one else considered. Why these colors? Why this order? Without his hunger for hidden patterns, would he have probed so deeply into light's nature? This tension between myth and measurement echoes in the star maps of ancient navigators. Polynesian sailors didn't just see the constellation Scorpius as a celestial predator, they used its claws to mark the path to Tahiti. The same stars Greek myth painted as Orion's belt were Hawaiian fishermen's guide to currents and seasons. Like Newton's rainbow, these constellations were both story and tool, their symbolic shapes acting as mnemonics for precise celestial mechanics. The irony is rich. Newton's alchemical hues birthed modern optics, just as starry myths charted the way to real islands. Symbols, it seems, are often the cradle, not the coffin of discovery. Polynesian navigators didn't just sail by stars, they rode the backs of mythic beasts. Picture this, a canoe cutting through midnight waves, its pilot chanting the names of constellations not as distant lights, but as living guides. To them, the star cluster we call Scorpius wasn't a scorpion, it was Maui's fishhook, a celestial tool that had hauled islands from the sea, the Pleiades. A flock of birds called Matariki, whose rising signaled the season to plant. These weren't just stories, they were mnemonics, turning the sky into a compass where every star bore the name of a creature that knew the way. Navigators memorized entire star paths, sequences where the shark constellation led to the bird, which led to the turtle, a celestial highway painted in animal shapes. The genius of this system, it encoded complex navigational math into something unforgettable. You might forget an angle, but you'd never forget how the shark's teeth pointed toward Tahiti. Now cross the globe to Viking longships, where another kind of mythic tool steered explorers through fog. Norse sagas speak of sunstones, crystals of calcite that could locate the sun even on overcast days. Hold one to the sky, and its double refraction would reveal the sun's hidden position like a phantom compass. Modern experiments prove it works. A Viking captain could have used these crystals to navigate within 5 degrees of accuracy, rivaling early magnetic compasses. But here's what's fascinating. The Vikings didn't just see these stones as tools. They were fragments of the sun's chariot, stolen from the gods. By wrapping navigation in myth, they turned a mineral into a sacred ally, something to be revered as much as relied upon. Compare these systems to today's GPS, where satellites beam coordinates to screens devoid of story. The precision is undeniable, but something intangible has faded the intimacy between traveler and terrain. Polynesian navigators didn't just chart courses, they conversed with waves, reading ocean swells by feel, tasting wind shifts for land scent. Vikings didn't merely cross seas, they followed the whale's way, a path sung into existence by skalds. These weren't just routes, they were relationships woven with ecological reverence. That same reverence pulsed through the hands of medieval herbalists who believed plants bore clues to their uses in their very shapes. A walnut, with its shell like a skull and folds resembling a brain, was prescribed for headaches, a notion modern science partly vindicates, as walnuts contain neuroprotective omega-3s. Lungwort's speckled leaves, reminiscent of diseased lungs, became a remedy for bronchitis. We now know its mucilage soothes irritated tissues. The doctrine of signatures, as it was called, seems quaint until you realize it was proto-science, a system of observation, hypothesis, and testing, dressed in symbolic language. So did symbolism hold us back, or did it anchor us to the world in ways raw data cannot? The Polynesian shark constellation and the Viking sunstone both achieved something remarkable. They made the unknowable familiar, transforming abstract forces into allies with names and stories. Perhaps losing that language didn't just streamline navigation, it quieted a dialogue between humanity and the elements, one we're only now relearning as ecology teeters on the edge of crisis. The irony is profound. The very myths we dismissed as primitive might have been the first maps to a sustainable future. The mandrake root writhed from the earth like a tiny, screaming man, or so Renaissance herbalists believed. Its grotesquely human shape made it the ultimate fertility charm, prescribed to barren women who cradled it like a child. Never mind that the plant's hallucinogenic properties could as easily poison as heal. Its twisted limbs were proof enough for physicians that nature had stamped its purpose in flesh. This was the doctrine of signatures in action, the conviction that every plant, stone, and creature bore visible clues to its hidden virtues. A walnut's brain-like folds treated headaches, lungwort's speckled leaves soothed pulmonary ailments, and blood-red pomegranate seeds promised vitality. To modern eyes, it seems like superstition, but look closer. These weren't just wild guesses. They were hypotheses grounded in the belief that the cosmos spoke in patterns, and it was humanity's job to decipher them. Paracelsus, the swaggering alchemist physician, took this idea further. When he declared that yellow plants cure jaundice, he wasn't just spouting poetic nonsense. He was observing celandine, with its golden sap, did indeed show promise in treating liver disorders. Turmeric, saffron, their vibrant hues became diagnostic shorthand in an era before lab tests. The symbolism wasn't merely decorative, it was a functional framework, a way to organize the overwhelming chaos of nature into something approachable. Yet for every lucky guess, there were deadly missteps. Foxglove's thimble-shaped flowers might resemble a heart, and indeed, digitalis extracted from its leaves regulates heartbeat, but miscalculate the dose and it stops the heart instead. Then came William Harvey, wielding a scalpel instead of symbolism. When he published his groundbreaking work on blood circulation in 1628, he didn't invoke mandrake roots or celestial harmonies. He presented veins and arteries as hydraulic pipes, the heart as a mechanical pump. The body, in his vision, was no longer a microcosm of the universe but a machine, elegant, yes, but governed by physics, not metaphor. It was a seismic shift, one that seemed to relegate the doctrine of signatures to the realm of quaint folklore. But was the divide really so clean? Consider the stained glass of Chartres Cathedral, where sunlight streaming through blue and red panes didn't just tell biblical stories, it demonstrated optics. The same monks who prescribed heart-shaped herbs also ground lenses, noticing how colored glass bent light into healing beams. The rose window's kaleidoscopic patterns weren't just art, they were early experiments in refraction, proving that even the most mystical symbols could harbor empirical truths. The doctrine of signatures didn't die, it evolved, its poetic intuition yielding to precise measurement, but never fully losing its grip on how we see the world. Perhaps the real lesson lies in the tension between these approaches. Without the mandrake's false promise, would Harvey have been so driven to dissect its flaws? Without Paracelsus' chromatic hunches, would chemists have later isolated active compounds in those very yellow plants? Wrong theories, it turns out, aren't dead ends, they're scaffolding, shaky but essential, letting thinkers reach for truths they couldn't yet grasp. And sometimes, as the stained glass proves, beauty and breakthrough are cut from the same colored pane. Stained glass wasn't just decoration in medieval cathedrals, it was a laboratory where light itself became theology. When monks at Chartres Cathedral pieced together the rose window's jewel-toned panes, they weren't merely illustrating Bible stories. They were conducting experiments. Sunlight streaming through cobalt blue glass cast azure pools on the floor, while ruby red panes drenched stone in crimson. Theophilus, a 12th century monk and master glassmaker, left behind a manual detailing how different metals, cobalt for blue, gold for ruby, could transform sunlight into sacred hues. His recipes weren't just artistic, they were proto-scientific, noting how thickness and curvature altered light's behavior centuries before Newton's prism. This fusion of worship and optics didn't stop at the window ledge. The same monks who knelt beneath those kaleidoscopic vaults also ground lenses for reading stones, polishing quartz into magnifiers to decipher ancient texts. Their workshops became crucibles of invention, where the quest to illuminate scripture literally sharpened their understanding of refraction. By the time spectacle makers in Venice perfected eyeglasses in the 13th century, the leap to telescopes felt almost inevitable. The irony, the tools that would later dismantle the geocentric universe, Galileo's lenses, Kepler's star charts, were born from a tradition that saw the heavens as God's stained glass. Yet the most striking twist lies in Kepler's winter wanderings. While most remember him for planetary laws, few know he spent years sketching snowflakes, mesmerized by their six-fold symmetry. To him, each flake was a geometric hymn, proof that the divine spoke in angles and ratios. His sketches, eerily accurate for 1600, weren't just artistic whimsy. They were data, evidence that nature's chaos hid mathematical order. The same mind that calculated elliptical orbits also saw God's hand in frozen fractals, bridging the gap between mysticism and microscopy. So did faith fuel discovery or obscure it? The answers etched in glass and ice alike. The rose windows colors guided optics as surely as Kepler's snowflakes hinted at crystallography. Perhaps the boundary between prayer and proof was always porous, a lens, not a wall. Kepler's hands trembled as he caught a snowflake on his sleeve during a Prague winter, its six-pointed symmetry glistening like a miniature cosmos. In that frozen moment, the astronomer saw more than water crystallized. He glimpsed nature's hidden grammar. His 1611 treatise, The Six-Cornered Snowflake, didn't just marvel at their beauty, it asked a radical question: why hexagons? Not squares, not triangles, always six. To Kepler, this wasn't random geometry. It was evidence of a formative instinct, a divine blueprint guiding even the humblest ice speck toward perfect angles. His sketches, dotted with handwritten notes about honeycombs and pomegranate seeds, wove a poetic vision where the same mathematical rules governed celestial orbits and frozen dew. Yet across the English Channel, Robert Hooke peered through his microscope at frost with colder eyes. His micrographia depicted snowflakes with equal precision, but none of Kepler's reverence. Where the astronomer saw God's hand, the physicist saw geometry emerging from congruent particles, jostling for space. Hooke's secular lens stripped away symbolism, treating ice crystals as puzzles of physics rather than sacred texts. The irony, both men were right. Kepler's mystical intuition about nature's patterns guided him to ask the right questions, while Hooke's mechanical rigor laid groundwork for crystallography, the science of how atoms arrange themselves into those very hexagons. This tension between wonder and methodology raises a deeper question. Must science purge itself of awe to progress? The answer might lie in an unexpected place: ancient Egypt's coal jars. Archaeologists analyzing pharaonic makeup kits found something startling. Lead-based eyeliner recipes weren't just cosmetic. Papyrus texts describe precise mixtures of galena and malachite, minerals we now know have antibacterial properties. When Egyptians rimmed their eyes with these pastes, They weren't just warding off evil spirits, they were unknowingly fighting infections. The same culture that saw the Eye of Horus as a mystical protector also developed proto-antiseptics, blending ritual with remedy. Modern labs confirm their accidental genius. Lead salts in coal stimulate nitric oxide production, boosting immunity against conjunctivitis, a disease rampant along the Nile. Here, symbolism and science weren't enemies, they were collaborators. The magical belief that coal shielded vision primed Egyptians to observe its medical benefits, much like Kepler's snowflake mysticism foreshadowed crystallography. Perhaps the healthiest scientific mindset isn't one that dismisses wonder, but one that channels it into sharper observation. After all, before we could explain why snowflakes have 6 sides, we first had to care enough to ask. Coal-lined eyes stared back from bronze mirrors along the Nile. Their dark rims more than just beauty, they were armor. The green malachite and black galena crushed into those iconic eyeliners didn't just symbolize the watchful gaze of Horus, they pulsed with copper ions, silently slaughtering bacteria. Modern labs analyzing ancient makeup jars made a startling discovery. The same lead compounds Egyptians believed warded off evil spirits also triggered nitric oxide production, creating a barrier against infections like conjunctivitis, which thrived in the Nile's marshes. The Ebers Papyrus, a 3,500-year-old medical text, prescribes these mixtures alongside incantations to Isis, blending spells with recipes that, unbeknownst to its authors, contained salicylic acid, the pain-relieving backbone of aspirin. A healer chanting over a crushed willow poultice might have called it magic, but the throbbing joint it soothed didn't care about the incantation, only the chemistry. This collision of ritual and remedy forces a provocative question. Did ceremony act as a Trojan horse for early science? When a priest applied coal while invoking Horus, was the real power in the prayer or the copper? The answer lies in the duality of observation. Symbolism gave structure to trial and error. By attributing healing to divine will, ancient physicians systematized their experiments, recording which plants reduced fever or stanched bleeding, even if they credited gods rather than glucose or alkaloids. The line between temple and clinic was porous. A malaria patient sipping bitter wormwood tea under a chant to Sekhmet was ingesting artemisinin precursors, millennia before modern pharmacology named them. Now leap across the Atlantic, where Mayan astronomers painted the cosmos as a coiled serpent devouring the sun during eclipses. To modern eyes, it's myth. To them, it was predictive astronomy. Their Dresden Codex doesn't just depict serpent symbols, it calculates eclipse cycles with precision rivaling today's software. The snake wasn't decoration, it was a mnemonic for celestial mechanics, its undulating body tracing the moon's nodes where eclipses occur. Just as malachite's copper hid beneath Horus symbolism, the serpent's scales concealed logarithmic tables. Ritual didn't obstruct science, it packaged it, making the incomprehensible tangible. When a priest declared the serpent would strike on a certain date, he wasn't prophesying, he was computing, wrapped in a metaphor that made the math memorable. The through line is clear. From Nile pharmacies to Mayan observatories, humanity's first experiments wore ceremonial robes. Symbols weren't the enemy of empiricism, they were its cradle, protecting fragile seeds of truth until they could root in the open. At the spring equinox, the shadow slithers down El Castillo's limestone steps, a serpent of light and darkness stretching 90 feet to meet its stone-carved head at the pyramid's base. To the Maya, this wasn't just a trick of the sun. It was Kukulkan, the feathered serpent god, descending to bless the earth. But peel back the spectacle, and you'll find an astronomical clockwork so precise it still marks the equinoxes centuries after its builders vanished. The pyramid's 4 staircases each have 91 steps, totaling 364 when combined with the shared platform, one for every day of the solar year plus one symbolic step representing the gods. This fusion of myth and mathematics didn't stop at the equinox. In the Dresden Codex, Mayan scribes charted Venus' 584-day cycle with an error margin of just 2 hours, using these calculations to time raids during the planet's malevolent phases. War wasn't waged haphazardly. It followed celestial rhythms where the evening star's position dictated strategy as meticulously as any modern military satellite. Yet their cosmology couldn't have been more different from Newton's, where the Maya saw time as a wheel repeating, cyclical, each era collapsing into the next like the layers of a pyramid. Newton envisioned a linear, mechanistic universe ticking forward like clock gears. His absolute time flowed uniformly, indifferent to human rituals or planetary omens. The contrast is stark. One culture mapped the heavens to guide earthly actions, while the other sought to divorce celestial motion from human meaning entirely. Which raises a provocative question: did Newton's rejection of symbolism strip something vital from science? The Maya's serpent shadow wasn't just decoration. It was a pedagogical tool, teaching complex astronomy through visceral metaphor. Without Kukulkan's descent, would farmers have grasped the equinox's agricultural significance? Without Venus as a warrior's omen, would nobles have funded observations that rival modern ephemerides? Now sail north to Viking longships where captains clutched sunstone's crystals of Icelandic spar to navigate foggy seas. These weren't mere compasses, they were fragments of legend. Norse sagas spoke of the sunstone as a gift from the gods, able to reveal Sol's hidden position even through clouds. Modern experiments prove the science. Calcite crystals polarize light, creating double images that align with the sun's azimuth when rotated. But here's what's extraordinary. Vikings likely didn't understand polarization as a physical property. To them, the stone's magic was divine, a tangible link to Sol's chariot racing across the sky. Yet this mystical lens led them to Greenland and Newfoundland with astonishing accuracy, their mythic tools yielding real-world precision. The lesson: whether it's Kukulkan's shadow or a sunstone's glow, symbols often serve as bridges between the measurable and the meaningful, the calculated and the cherished. Strip away the metaphor, and you might gain objectivity, but lose the compass that first guided discovery. Viking sagas whispered of sunstone's magical crystals that could capture the sun's position even when storms blotted out the sky. To Norse sailors, these weren't just tools, they were fragments of the gods stolen from Sol's chariot to guide mortals across treacherous seas. Modern science cracked their secret. Icelandic spar, a form of calcite crystal, bends light in 2 directions, creating double images. Rotate the stone until the shadows align, and suddenly, the hidden sun's azimuth snaps into view. Experiments with replicas show Viking navigators could have pinpointed the sun's location within 5 degrees accuracy, rivaling early magnetic compasses. The irony: these magic stones relied on polarization, the same physics behind the LCD screen you're likely watching this on. Every smartphone and flat-panel TV bends light waves just like those Viking crystals, proving ancient myth and modern tech share invisible threads. What's haunting is how close this knowledge came to vanishing. Medieval Europe dismissed sunstones as pagan superstition, favoring magnetic compasses until cloudy skies rendered those needles useless. For centuries, the trick was preserved not in scholarly texts but in oral sagas, passed down as poetic metaphor. When archaeologists finally tested calcite's properties against the legends, they realized the so-called fake news of the Norse held precise observational science wrapped in story. It forces an uncomfortable question: How many other ancient hacks have we lost because they sounded too fantastical to record? This dance between symbol and function takes a sharper turn with the Hindu concept of sunya, the void. To philosophers, it represented cosmic emptiness, the silent pause between breaths. But mathematicians saw deeper potential. By the 6th century, Indian scholars had transformed sunya into zero, a numeral that didn't just signify absence but enabled place value, letting one distinguish between 10, 100, and 1000 with a single digit. The same symbol that once evoked spiritual nothingness became the backbone of calculus, computing, and the digital age. Like the sunstone's double refraction, zero's power lay in its duality. It was both philosophical concept and mathematical tool, a bridge between meditation and measurement. The through line is clear: from calcite crystals to empty circles, humanity's greatest leaps often begin as symbols we mistake for superstition. Perhaps progress isn't about dismissing the past's fake news, but learning to read its hidden equations. Long before zero appeared in equations, it lived in the hushed chants of Indian monks, a whisper of sunya, the void. This wasn't just emptiness, it was a cosmic pause, the breath between thoughts in meditation. To grasp its power, picture a monk tracing circles in sand, each one a mirror of the infinite, a placeholder for what language couldn't capture. Centuries before Brahmagupta etched zero into mathematical texts in 628, this symbol pulsed through spiritual practice, a bridge between the tangible and the transcendent. Yet halfway across the world, the Maya shuddered at the same concept. Their Vitruvian system had a shell glyph for zero, but they used it sparingly, not out of ignorance but dread. To them, emptiness wasn't a tool, it was an omen, a rupture in the ordered fabric of time. The same symbol that liberated Indian astronomers to calculate celestial motions struck fear in Mayan scribes, who saw it as a portal to chaos. The irony is staggering. What one culture revered as sacred, another feared as cursed, yet both responses acknowledged zero's transformative power. When French mathematician Pierre-Simon Laplace called zero profound, he was echoing the monk's intuition that absence could be as generative as presence. Without zero, calculus collapses, computers stall, the entire digital age grinds to a halt. But here's the twist. Zero's journey from meditation cushion to microchip forces us to ask whether abstraction can even exist without symbolism. Could Leibniz have conceived binary code without the yin-yang duality of 1 and 0? Could Einstein's equations balance without the vacuum energy humming in the void? The answer might lie in an unexpected place, Dante's Inferno. When Dante penned his descent through 9 concentric circles of hell, he wasn't just crafting theology, he was channeling an ancient intuition about Earth's hidden layers. Medieval minds imagined the underworld as a literal mirror of the planet's strata: fire, stone, abyss. Geologists now know those layers exist, though not as punishment. Dante's hellish funnel prefigured the modern understanding of Earth's core, where pressure and heat warp matter into unthinkable forms. The poet's symbolic vision, like the monk's sunya, turned abstraction into something visceral, a scaffold for truths too vast to hold. The lesson: from zero's birthplace in meditation to its reign over algorithms, from hell's circles to seismic waves, humanity's greatest leaps often begin as symbols we learn to read, then rewrite. The void isn't empty after all, it's alive with possibility, waiting for the next mind to listen. Dante's descent into the 9 circles of hell wasn't just a literary masterpiece, it was an accidental geology textbook. When he described sinners trapped in ever deeper rings of fire, ice, and molten rock, he was unknowingly sketching Earth's layered structure centuries before seismographs could prove it. The poet's vision of hell as a narrowing funnel mirrored reality with eerie precision. the crust where traitors froze in Cocytus, the mantle where violent souls boiled in Phlegethon's rivers of blood, and the core where Satan himself gnawed on Judas in eternal ice. Medieval scholars took these descriptions literally, believing hell's fires fueled volcanoes like Etna and Stromboli, gateways to the underworld where damned souls screamed through sulfurous vents. This wasn't just superstition, it was proto-volcanology. By attributing eruptions to hell's breath, they created the first causal model for why mountains spewed fire, pushing thinkers to map subterranean plumbing long before plate tectonics. The hollow earth theory, popularized by Edmund Halley in the 17th century, echoed these medieval visions. Halley proposed concentric shells rotating inside the planet to explain magnetic anomalies, a concept straight out of Dante's playbook. Even Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth borrowed from this tradition, depicting caverns lit by glowing gases, a romanticized version of what we now know as magma chambers. The line between allegory and hypothesis was porous. When Pliny the Elder perished observing Vesuvius in 79, his last notes described pyroclastic flows as the god's wrath, yet his meticulous recordings of ash layers became foundational for stratigraphy. This raises a provocative question. Did literature accelerate scientific discovery by giving raw observation narrative shape? Consider Arabic alchemists distilling roses into a tar. Their perfume making wasn't just ritual, it was precision chemistry born from incense traditions. When they burned frankincense in temples, they noted how resins melted at specific temperatures, separating into volatile oils and residues. These sacred rites became laboratory protocols, with alembics and condensers evolving from vessels meant to capture divine essence. The same hands that crafted rosewater for prayer also isolated ethanol, proving that the line between altar and lab was never as stark as we imagine. Perhaps symbolism's greatest gift was its ability to make the invisible tangible. Dante's hell gave form to Earth's unseen depths, just as perfume chemistry revealed hidden molecular structures. Both began as acts of devotion, one to God, the other to scent, and both unexpectedly became maps to deeper truths. Jabir ibn Hayyan's glass alembic glowed in the Baghdad sunlight as rose petals simmered into steam, their essence condensing into the first drops of pure rosewater. To 8th century scholars, this wasn't just perfume, it was sacred alchemy, a way to purify the body for prayer. But hidden in those swirling vapors lay a revolution. Jabir's meticulous notes on distillation temperatures and cooling coils became the bedrock of organic chemistry. His quest for ritual purity accidentally birthing techniques still used in labs today. The irony, while he sought to capture the soul of flowers for spiritual cleansing, his methods would later isolate everything from antibiotics to essential oils. Musk tells a similar tale. Ancient priests burned deer gland extracts in temples, believing their animalic warmth could bridge earth and heaven. Modern science reveals why. Musk molecules mimic human pheromones, triggering primal responses in the brain's limbic system. The same scent that once summoned deities now sells colognes, proving that ritual often codes for biology long before we understand the mechanism. Step inside a modern fragrance lab and the contrast is striking. Where Jabir's workshop revered rose oil as divine, today's chemists synthesize linalool and geraniol molecules identical to those in petals from petrochemicals. The sacred hierarchies of scent, once dictated by rarity and ritual, now bow to mass production. Yet something lingers. When perfumers speak of notes and accords, they echo the alchemist's language, their formulas still chasing the ineffable magic that turned prayer into chemistry. This tension between reverence and replication takes a violent turn with Aztec warriors. Their quilted Icahuapilli armor, woven from layers of cotton soaked in brine, could deflect Spanish steel arrows, a feat modern ballistics experts confirmed by testing replicas. The same fibers that cloaked priests in ritual garb also shielded soldiers, their tight quilting dispersing impact like Kevlar. Spanish chroniclers dismissed it as cloth, never guessing that centuries later, military engineers would study its structure to design lightweight body armor. So does ritual purity drive innovation? The answer whispers in rosewater and musk, in cotton soaked sacred and salty. Time and again, the quest to touch the divine sharpens our grasp of the tangible, turning prayer into protocol and armor into art. Spanish steel clanged against Aztec armor, and to the conquistadors' shock, their arrows bounced right off. The invaders scoffed at what looked like simple padded cloth, but these Icahuapilli vests were feats of textile engineering. Layers of cotton, tightly quilted and soaked in brine, hardened into a flexible barrier that dispersed impact like modern body armor. Modern ballistics tests prove it. Replicas can stop arrows traveling at nearly 150 feet per second. The secret lay in the cross-hatched stitching, a pattern so effective it inspired the interwoven fibers of 20th century Kevlar. Yet to the Aztecs, these weren't just tactical garments. They were sacred objects infused with the protective power of feathers from Quetzal birds, symbols of divine authority. That same reverence for feathers now fuels aerospace labs. The Quetzal's iridescent plumes don't just dazzle, their microscopic barbules scatter light in ways that resist heat buildup. Engineers mimicking this structure have created thermal shielding for spacecraft, proving that ceremonial adornments can harbor cutting-edge physics. The Aztecs wore feathers to channel gods. Scientists now study them to deflect atmospheric re-entry temperatures. This collision of ritual and innovation forces a radical question. What if tradition isn't the opposite of progress, but its blueprint? Greek philosophers grappled with a similar duality. When Empedocles declared earth, air, fire, and water the roots of all matter, he wasn't just myth-making. His elements became the periodic table's rough draft categories that guided alchemists to experiment with purification and transformation. The same symbolic quartet that adorned medieval manuscripts also shaped Lavoisier's hunt for oxygen. Fire wasn't just a spiritual metaphor. It was a laboratory tool, burning away impurities to reveal base metal's true nature. The thread connecting quilted armor and elemental theory is taught with irony. Both began as symbolic systems, one weaving status and sanctity into fabric, the other mapping the cosmos onto four primal forces. Yet both, unexpectedly, became frameworks for empirical discovery. The Aztecs' brine-soaked cotton and the Greeks' flickering flames were more than cultural artifacts. They were the first prototypes, waiting centuries for science to decode their genius. Empedocles stared into the flames of his Sicilian forge, convinced the flickering heat held the key to everything. His four elements, earth, air, fire, water, weren't just poetic metaphors. They were a bold claim that all matter could be distilled into primal essences. 2,000 years later, Lavoisier would stand over his own furnace, meticulously weighing mercury oxide as it decomposed, proving fire wasn't an element at all but a process: oxygen binding, releasing, transforming. The irony is thick. The same symbolic quartet that guided alchemists to waste centuries searching for philosophical earth also gave Lavoisier the conceptual framework to isolate gases and name oxygen. Wrong symbols, it seems, can still point toward right questions. Alchemy's lexicon dripped with its own cryptic motifs. Mercury symbolized fluidity and transformation. Sulfur embodied combustibility and soul, archetypes that shaped laboratories from Cairo to Prague. When medieval adepts distilled quicksilver or burned brimstone, they weren't just mixing substances, they were acting out cosmic dramas where matter mirrored the heavens. Fast forward to Mendeleev's St. Petersburg study, where playing cards scrawled with atomic weights revealed a different kind of magic, periodicity. His table didn't just organize elements, it predicted gaps where undiscovered metals like gallium should slot in. The alchemists' mercury and sulfur became columns and rows, their mystical duality refined into atomic numbers and electron shells. Robert Boyle's The Skeptical Chimist hammered the final nail into symbolism's coffin, or so it seemed. His 1661 treatise mocked alchemists who vainly expected cherries from an elm, demanding experiments over emblems. Yet even Boyle couldn't fully escape metaphor. His corpuscular theory, which imagined particles hooked together, owed as much to mechanical philosophy as it did to the very alchemical imagery he denounced. The shift from symbol to substance was never clean. It was a messy metamorphosis where old frameworks cracked open to reveal new truths. Now tilt the lens eastward, where imperial Chinese astronomers faced a different challenge, Earth's fury. In 132, Zhang Heng unveiled his seismoscope, a bronze urn ringed with 8 dragon heads, each clutching a metal ball above corresponding toads. When tremors struck, a hidden pendulum would tilt, dislodging a single ball to clang into its amphibian catcher. Modern reconstructions prove it worked, detecting quakes hundreds of miles away. But here's what's fascinating: the dragons weren't decoration, they were data visualization. Each head pointed to a cardinal direction, turning abstract seismic waves into a story. The earth dragon stirring, its anger localized and quantified. Zhang's device forces us to reconsider symbolism's role in discovery. Those mythic serpents didn't obscure science, they made it legible. Just as Mendeleev's table gave chaos a grid, the seismoscope's dragons translated tremors into actionable intelligence. Perhaps the line between alchemy and chemistry, between divination and seismology, was never about discarding symbols but learning to read them anew. Zhang Heng's earthquake detector stood motionless in the Han Dynasty court until the ground itself betrayed its secret. The bronze urn's 8 serpentine dragons, each poised to release a metal ball into the mouth of a waiting toad, seemed like ceremonial art. Then, without warning, a single dragon clattered to life, its jaws spitting a ball westward. Days later, messengers galloped in with news. A quake had ravaged a distant province in precisely that direction. To the court, it was sorcery. To Zhang, it was simple mechanics, a hidden pendulum swaying with seismic waves, tripping a lever that triggered the corresponding dragon. Modern engineers rebuilt his device and gasped. It detected quakes up to 400 miles away with eerie accuracy. Those ornate dragons weren't just decor, they were data visualization, turning invisible tremors into actionable intelligence centuries before Richter scales. Now zoom in on a seismograph's paper scroll today, and you'll see jagged peaks and valleys, serpentine lines that uncannily mirror Zhang's bronze coils. The difference: one relied on mythic beasts to communicate danger, the other uses inked needles, yet both share a deeper truth. Humans instinctively encode chaos into familiar shapes. When seismic waves rip through bedrock, we don't perceive raw force, we see dragons stirring or pens dancing. The same urge to anthropomorphize nature's fury birthed Japan's Namezu, the giant catfish whose thrashing supposedly caused quakes, and Norse legends of Loki's writhing bound beneath the earth. These weren't just stories, they were cognitive tools, helping cultures process the incomprehensible through symbolism. But here's the twist: sometimes art perceives what logic overlooks. Celtic knotwork, those mesmerizing interlaced patterns adorning 9th century gospel books, hid mathematical brilliance beneath their beauty. At first glance, they're decorative endless loops with no beginning or end. But trace a single thread, and you're suddenly mapping early topology, the study of surfaces and connectivity. Monk scribes weaving these knots weren't just illustrating, they were exploring how lines could twist through dimensions without breaking, a concept formalized a millennium later by mathematicians like Euler. The same interlaced bands that symbolized eternity in Christian iconography also encoded geometric principles that would later underpin everything from DNA's double helix to quantum field theory. So did the monks understand they were drafting equations? Unlikely, but their meditative craftsmanship, like Zhang's dragons, proves that intuition often outpaces explanation. When hands move in rhythm with deeper patterns, whether casting bronze or inking parchment, they sometimes scribe truths the mind hasn't yet named. The dragons warned, the knots computed. And in their tangled paths, both hinted that science and symbol might be two sides of the same coin, minted long before we knew its worth. A monk's quill traces an endless loop on vellum, the ink curling back upon itself without beginning or end, a Celtic knotwork so perfect it seems to breathe. To 9th century scribes, these interlaced bands symbolized eternity, the divine cycle of creation and rebirth. Yet run your finger along a single thread, and you're suddenly tracing something far more profound, a topological puzzle. These knots aren't just art, they're early experiments in continuity, they're unbroken paths hinting at mathematical concepts that wouldn't be formalized for 1,000 years. The same spirals that adorned gospel margins prefigured the Möbius strip, that mind-bending surface with only one side, long before mathematicians proved its possibility. Now imagine a Viking warrior whispering over a knotted cord, each twist and tuck a spell to bind winds or curses. Archaeologists find these thread spells from Iceland to Russia, intricate braids believed to harness supernatural forces. But look closer, the patterns mirror the very equations string theorists now use to describe the fabric of spacetime. When modern physicists sketch Calabi-Yau manifolds, those six-dimensional shapes that may underpin reality, they're not so different from Norse shamans weaving fate into fiber. Both are grappling with the same fundamental question: can complexity be tamed by threading it into knots? This raises a startling possibility. What if mathematics is mythology in disguise? The Pythagorean reverence for perfect ratios began as temple mystery. Newton's calculus sprouted from alchemical obsessions. Even today, physicists speak of the elegance of equations as if beauty were proof, a holdover from when symmetry was sacred. The Celtic knot's endless path, the Vikings' enchanted braid, the string theorists' vibrating loops, all share a lineage of humans seeking order in chaos by tying it into patterns they could comprehend. Yet symbolism is a double-edged sword. For every Kepler finding truth in snowflake hexagons, there's an alchemist wasting centuries on lead-to-gold fantasies. The knots that guided topology also constrained it. Early mathematicians dismissed the Möbius strip as impossible because their intuition, shaped by Euclidean geometry, couldn't fathom a surface with only one side. Progress often means cutting old threads or recognizing when they've become shackles. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies in the rope itself. Whether woven by monks, warriors, or physicists, it's always been both tool and metaphor, a way to bind the known to the unknown, measure to mystery. The knots endure, but their meaning evolves, from incantation to equation, from eternity to entropy. And in that tension, science finds its strangest truth, that every breakthrough begins with someone daring to tie the first loop. The Vitruvian Man's outstretched limbs no longer merely sketch ideal proportions, they span the chasm between ancient wonder and modern precision. Da Vinci's iconic figure, nested within circle and square, was more than an artistic exercise. It was a hypothesis in ink, asserting that the human body held geometric secrets waiting to be measured. Today, we know his calculations weren't perfect, the navel isn't the body's true center, and limbs don't align flawlessly with Euclidean shapes, yet his error was fertile. By overlaying symbolism onto flesh, he trained science to seek patterns in chaos, proving that even flawed metaphors can scaffold discovery. This duality pulses through history. Alchemy's quest for the philosopher's stone, a symbol of perfection, led to crucibles where metals dissolved, gases condensed, and the periodic table's precursors emerged. Astrology's Zodiac, once a celestial storybook, became astronomy's first coordinate system, its 12 signs anchoring telescopes to the night sky. Even the Rosetta Stone, etched with sacred script, proved that decoding symbols could unlock empires of knowledge. Dismiss these frameworks as mere superstition, and you erase the curiosity that birthed laboratories. The alchemist's flask and the astrolabe's brass rings weren't dead ends, they were prototypes, rough drafts of tools we still use today. Sacred geometry's legacy is equally tangible. Gothic cathedrals, designed as heaven on earth, embedded the golden ratio into arches that defied gravity through math. Builders didn't understand stress vectors, but their intuition that harmony implied stability pioneered engineering principles still studied in architecture schools. When Kepler traced planetary orbits to ellipses, he didn't abandon the celestial spheres of his predecessors. He refined them, showing how myth could evolve into law without losing its awe. Now turn the lens to our era. Quantum physics teases us with entanglement, spooky action at a distance that Einstein himself dismissed as folklore. Artificial intelligence, with its neural black boxes, feels less like circuitry and more like oracle bones, spitting out answers we don't fully comprehend. These aren't just scientific challenges, they're today's symbolic mysteries, inviting us to ask which modern metaphors might harbor tomorrow's breakthroughs. Will string theory's vibrating filaments one day seem as obvious as Newton's prisms? Could blockchain's ledgers become the new Zodiac, mapping digital constellations we've yet to navigate? The lesson isn't to fetishize the past, but to honor its lineage. Every paradigm shift begins with someone daring to see equations in starlight or anatomy in geometry. So tell us in the comments, which modern myth do you suspect hides a kernel of truth? The answer might already be whispering, not in ancient scrolls, but in the algorithms and atoms we're only beginning to decode.